Welcome, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our latest event in the series, part of our Research and Policy Forum on Climate Change and Environment in the Arab World, which is organized by the Hassan Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at AUB. This is the 8th event that we've had in this series, and I think this is going to be the last one in climate change for this year, and then we'll have other events coming up. We're delighted to have Berj Hatjian, but before I start, I want to just mention that we have 2 more events coming up this year before the school year finishes. And next week, we're honored to have President John Waterbury speaking on his reflections on my journey in political economy and public policy, reflections from the Arab world and other developing countries. That's next Wednesday at 5 o'clock in Bathish Auditorium. So if you've always wondered what President Waterbury feels about public policy and development, this is your, and academia and political economy, this is your chance to find out. And next Thursday, our final event of the year will be a lecture by Anthony Shadid, who's the Washington Post Middle East correspondent, a Pulitzer Prize winner, one of the best American journalists of the last generation in the Middle East, and he's a visiting fellow at our institute, and he will be giving a public lecture next Thursday, probably around 4 o'clock. We'll announce that. And if you want to get on our mailing list and you're not, we'll pass a paper around. It's going around, so just sign it. Today's talk by Dr. Berj Hatjian, the Director General of the Lebanese Ministry of Environment. Most of you, I'm sure, know him. The exciting thing about this talk for us, which makes it a little bit different than the other ones, is the perspective coming from the public sector, from a policymaker who's also an AUB graduate. And one of the aims of our forum on climate change, as well as the other fora that we're running on youth issues, Palestinian refugee camps and their host communities in the Middle East. The aim of this work that we're trying to promote at the Hassan Faris Institute is to bring together researchers and policymakers. And we define policymakers widely. It means public sector, private sector, NGOs, international organizations, donors, etc. So we define it, and public opinion. So we're pleased to have Dr. Hatjian as our first public sector speaker, who also graduated from AUB, understands academia, and has been a real partner and friend and supporter since we started. In fact, the whole idea of this came actually in this room about a year ago. We were doing a little talk about, I can't even remember, it was about environment stuff in the Middle East, one of our early little informal talks, and it was the first time we met. And immediately we said, you know, we need to do something to have policymakers and academics sit together regularly and exchange ideas and to learn from each other. I mean, we're both humble, but academics and government people are both humble, but also both knowledgeable, and they need to learn from each other. And it was that meeting we said we should try to think of something. And then later, when we launched our environment program, it was Dr. Nadim Farajallah, who's with us in the back, who is the faculty and research director of our climate change forum. It was Nadim who actually said, why don't we make the focus on climate change? And partly that shirt he's wearing, I think he realizes that it's going to, by itself, it's going to change the climate. But it was Nadim who actually gave us the focus on climate change and global warming as an issue that was critically important for this region, and in fact did not have sufficient attention from the policymakers, in our view. We'll hear now from a policymaker, and we may be corrected, but we thought this was a great focal point for this work, and this is how our process has been launched. So I will turn it over to Dr. Hatjian and to thank him for being an active supporter and colleague and friend, and as we start this process, we will do a lot more in the years ahead, and I'm sure you will hear from him again, as well as from many other officials and private sector and academics who we will bring to interact together on these issues.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be among this beautiful congregation of colleagues and friends at the Isam Ferris Institute at AUB. And I want to thank my friend Rami for giving me the opportunity to share with you some thoughts about the topic at hand, which is the tripod of academia, public sector, and government in moving the train from science to policy. But it is daring to speak about this subject in front of President Waterbury, who has practiced policy and science in the Arab region, if not globally. And basically, this lecture is to try to get me out of this joke of the professor who goes lecturing around the world. And excuse me for those who have heard this little joke from me. There's this professor who goes around universities telling the same lecture with his driver. At one point in time, his driver says, you know, you give the same lecture, you get the same answers, and we finish this. Why don't we change roles? So he says, why not? So the professor wore the driver's cap, and the driver wore the professor's tie. He gave the lecture, and then he got the same questions and the same answers. Eventually, there's a nice, intelligent, shrewd journalist at the back of the room who asks a very difficult question. So he says to him, you know, your question is so trivial, I'll ask my driver sitting at the back to answer it. So I don't want to give a lecture here. I'm not an authority on this subject in any shape or form. I'm the most novice of this group today in this room, trying to attempt to discuss the interlinkages between the three bodies, which is government, academia, and the private sector. But what struck me to think about this subject is an article I once read in Asia Pacific from the Prime Minister of Japan, the ex-Prime Minister of Japan, who said that the Japanese economy was the fastest growing economy in the early 90s. By the late 90s, it dropped from number 1 as a growing economy to number 30. And he said one of the ways to get out of this trough is to draw a nice link between academia, government, and the government and the private sector. And he explained in brief in his article why is that one of the ways to move forward. In my very modest opinion, I think the strength of one is the weakness of the other between those three bodies. Let's start with academia, because we are at academia today. Academia has the human resources, the brain power, the state of art of thinking, the free mind, searching for the truth, disregarding all the variables around it. The private sector is obviously profit-oriented, and I remember very well sitting in this room with Dr. Waterbury chairing a debate on what could be the scope of the Isam Ferris Institute. This was perhaps 2 years ago, right here in this room. And I heard one of the private sector representatives saying, it was, I remember, ex-Minister Qurum saying that government sector, the public sector in this country is an active sector that is clean, that is trying to make a difference. But from his experience, the private sector keeps at it until it corrupts it. This was the understanding of Dr. Qurum. So when the private sector person took over, he says, yes, we want to corrupt you because you block us from maximizing our profit. And you remember this. And then the turn came to me, and I was representing the government and the environment sector, and my friend Karim was also representing the academia and the environment sector. And it just so happens that I read a book titled Built to Last. And this is a book written by the Stanford University Business School professors. And one of the elements of great companies, great private sector of this world, is that they have a core credo of 10 to 15 sort of 10 commandments, one of which is community first, profit next. Why? Because if the private sector keeps the community healthy, the community can actually produce more, and its purchasing power and its power to buy the product of the private sector is propagating sustainably. However, if the profit is first and community benefit is second, then eventually the community dwindles and you will dwindle with the community. So the private sector, although is a profit-making business, is important in the tripod for multiple of reasons. There's the consulting private sector and the contracting private sector. Eventually, if you want to do things and change things, you have to have people to press the buttons somewhere. Let's say you want to build a wastewater treatment plant. If you don't have a competent contracting private sector to operate this wastewater treatment plant, it will never happen. So the private sector is important for its capacity to produce and its capacity to fire and hire very quickly. And in another book published by the same professors of Bill Toulas in a book called Good to Great, How to Move from a Good Entity, a good body, to a great entity, he said one of the best things to do is to get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, put the right people on the seat, and the bus will go to the destination needed with no effort whatsoever. Unfortunately, in the public sector in academia, fire and hire is not easy. You're stuck with a professor sitting at a chair blocking progress at a certain department. Or you're stuck with a director general at a certain ministry or a minister who's blocking the whole system to move. In the private sector, nobody blocks anything. You can fire and hire very quickly, you're mobile, and you can tackle new problems as they come to you. Again, reading more about this subject, in less developing countries, the public sector usually is 50% of the economy. So if we sit down reading newspapers and drinking coffee, 50% of the country is blocked, as has happened in the last whatever number of months. So the public sector in less developing countries, because it constitutes more than 50% of the economy, if it is dormant, 50% of your economy is dormant. And therefore, because it is that large, it is a major crossroad. When the private sector wants to talk to the private sector, they move through academia. If the academia wants to develop in some dimension or the other, sometimes they have to pass through this crossroad. So if this crossroad is blocked, there's traffic jam in the country. So the public sector in less developing countries, by virtue of its size and virtue of its representation in the economy, tends to block things. And if they are not a vibrant entity, one of the tripod of the triangle is basically limbing. So the three together have the weaknesses and the strength of each other. And that's why they are complementary to kickstart an economy or to kickstart something forward. Now, any problem we tackle to reach a policy has 4 dimensions. And this is what we have learned through our public practice. Every problem that needs to be tackled by this tripod has a technical component, a financial component, a legal component, and a managerial component, administrative managerial component. Any of those 4 legs, if absent, science cannot move to policy. You might have a brilliant wastewater treatment plan, but you don't have the microbiologists to operate the bacteria in your tanks. The wastewater treatment plant will stop. You pay millions of dollars, you don't get anywhere, just because you don't have the environmental microbiologists. Who brings those people into the market? It's academia. Who builds those wastewater treatment plants? It's the public sector's money. Who does it actually? It's the private sector contracting and consulting people. So this is a very quick example. So the minute you don't have a legal framework, for example, in the solid waste sector in the country, the legal structure is the contract that has been signed between the government and the private consulting or contracting company. We don't have a framework law for solid waste. It's exactly like what happened in the mobile phone sector. There was no law to regulate the sector, and the Bible and the Quran of the sector became the contract between the government and the two mobile companies. And nobody was able to break through because there's no legal framework to break through. So you have to break the contracts to break the legal framework, and that costed the governments millions of dollars. So in the absence of a good legal framework, nothing can move. Who knows how to put the legal framework? It's not the lawyers alone, and it's not the scientists alone, and it's not the economists alone, and it's not nobody alone. There must be a multidisciplinary approach to things. And usually who has this multidisciplinary team at hand? It's academia. Academia perhaps is the quickest to compile a multidisciplinary team around a subject. Then the legal framework has to be instated or enacted by the parliament. So here comes the public administration's role in putting the framework in place. Finance. Academia doesn't have finance, but needs to be more at the state of art of things, trying to sell the ideas well to the private sector and to the public sector, trying to leverage return on ideas that are funded by these two. But again, for example, in this case, the private sector wants to donate money. If there's no revenue from donating this, nothing can move. They would not put the money into it. They would put sort of petty cash stuff into it. If they want to put real money, they want revenue. When they want to put real money, and there's no framework for the private sector to contribute to research by tax exemptions, they would not put the money. It's difficult to put the money. In England, for example, the private sector, when they donate money to research in academia, that part of their contribution is tax exempt, is not considered part of the profit. If we don't have a legal framework to allow the private sector to contribute, then their contribution will be minimal. And if you look at research globally, it's not funded by charity, it's not funded by foundations, it's mainly funded by the private sector. I remember when I was back in UK, most of the funding was from the pharmaceutical industry and the chemical industry on issues related to chemicals and environment. So the subject is so wide. The subject is such a complex domain to tackle. But my personal belief is that the tripod is one of the ways forward. Do I have a very clear vision on how to do it? No. Have we done it before? Yes, but at a very sort of primitive level. I'll give two examples. More needs to be done in this domain to be able to create a revolving door of knowledge. You would find the CEO of, I don't know, IBM becoming an emeritus professor or a guest professor of Harvard, and one day he becomes a senior administrator in the administration. Once this revolving door takes place, it's easy to talk. Vocabulary that government uses is different to private sector, is different to academia. Once you have this revolving door happening, it helps people understanding each other better, talking to each other better, and understanding the strength and weaknesses of the red tape in government, for example. Understand the mobility and the state of art of production in the private sector. I remember a friend of mine was studying a Ph.D. For a Ph.D. in UK, and I was asking him, what will you do after you finish? He said to me, I studied my character, and I studied the different sectors I can work in. He says, in academia, you have to always be at the state of art of things. You have to produce novel ideas for research. And you have to be creative and bringing the money in to do the research. I'm not good at coming up with new ideas. He says, I thought of working in the private sector, and I know that the private sector has deadlines. You know, you have to get the product on the market before Christmas, because this is when the peak purchasing will happen, and I don't know how to work under deadlines and strict deadlines. I'm somebody who always crosses deadlines. I want to work with NGOs, but in NGOs you have to be a volunteer. You have to be ready to volunteer your time for the sake of the cause you're trying to tackle. And I don't like to volunteer my time. And then he thought he would like to work in government. He says, perhaps in government I would be the best, because I know how to follow instructions. In government, you get a policy, and everybody has to apply this policy, if it ever actually exists. And he says, when I was given the method, my laboratory method, I knew how to follow the instructions step by step. He studied this character and how it actually interacts with the different sectors. So the revolving door breaks through this. One time you're thinking as a government official, next time you're thinking as a researcher, third time you're thinking how to make profit for the company without jeopardizing the benefit of the community. And this is absent. You're an academician, you stay all your life an academician. You're a public servant, same thing. You're a private sector person, same thing. The revolving is not very active in this country, and that needs to be addressed to get this tripod moving. These are sort of my initial ideas about the subject. They're all over the place. I can see it on the faces. What is this guy talking about? He jumps from one idea to the other. But I'm here to hear more than to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Berj. We will open it up for comments and discussion, and I'd like to, as usual, use the prerogative of the moderator's chair to ask the first question, which is, one of the things we're thinking of doing at the Essam Fares Institute is to set up a mechanism for people who are in government to take a break. It could be a week, could be 3 days, could be a month. Month is a lot, but government people might be able to take 2-3 days or a week and come onto the campus, especially when we have our new building. But even now it could probably be done. And let a government person take a leave for 3-4 days and spend time here interacting with researchers, with graduate students, with academics, and we would organize off-the-record roundtables. Would it be useful in a situation like that to, and then even maybe bring in 1 or 2 private sector or NGO people for a discussion, preferably over lunch, but so that the government people feel right at home. And, but to have that kind of interaction while people are actually in office and to bounce ideas. Have you ever done anything like that? Do you think that would be useful?
That would be extremely useful because anybody wants time off from his daily duties and routine to be able to reflect on things, be it a government official coming to an academic institute or vice versa. You know, academicians go for sabbaticals for that purpose. There is no framework for this, and it's all down to the initiative of the individuals. And this is more or less one of the things we always suffer from in Lebanon. It's that most of the things that happen are individual initiatives on behalf of people. And once that individual is not there, the things stumble. The most important thing is to try to find an administrative structure for this revolving door, if I may call it a revolving door like you described it. It's in the government you can take sabbaticals, but they are non-paid sabbaticals. So any government official who wants to come and spend 3 months here or 1 month or 2 weeks, if there's no income, it has to be on his or her own pocket. Some people are willing to do it, some others are not. And I think it might be a good idea to think how to structure this revolving door and how to actually find incentives for people to go through that door.
You mentioned the tripod and probably a fourth leg for that tripod being probably the legal system. What about the international aspect of things, and especially the role of international donors when it comes to developing countries and their contribution to policy making or driving policy making, and how effective is that, especially when sometimes you see that things are being pushed or some templates or generic programs or projects are being sort of projected or pushed onto countries, and how effective is that?
Important question. Thank you for this very important question in the context of what we're talking about to push science into policy. In the environmental sector, there is no doubt that the activity or the initiatives of the international community had great influence on less developing countries in taking notice of the importance of this sector particularly. But I was talking with a friend the other day about allergies, and you just initiated an allergy in me, which is donors. They are not donors. They are development partners. It's a shared and differentiated responsibility in environment. And they are putting the money, and the country is putting the time and the human resources. So I don't like to call them donors. It's their responsibility to contribute. And I think this is where partnership is equal. Everybody puts a share. The government puts money, academia puts brain power, private sector puts dynamism. So the role of the international development partners is extremely important. But we need to work with the international community on equal level. The international agenda should not be imposed on us, but also we should not have a rejection of this international agenda. What we need to do is to try to marry our priorities at the national level with the international agenda. And sometimes you need to tell the international donor, I don't want to work on this subject, it's not a priority. You have to have the courage to say it, because if they drain you with a subject that is not of a priority to the country, you will be losing resources basically. Your cost-benefit ratio is low, you're putting human resources where you should be putting them somewhere else, so on and so forth. So their role is extremely important. No templates should come as is, no Bibles or Qur'ans, everything is debatable, and we need to be open about it, transparent about it, and just try to marry the interests of the international community with our local interests.
Nadeem, wait for the microphone so that we get it recorded.
Thanks, Berj. There has to be, somebody has to take the lead in coming up with, somebody has to take the lead in initiating this track work. And the way I see things happening here, I mean, I'm talking our experience in Lebanon. There's nobody willing to take that leadership. There is some hesitancy, definite hesitancy among academicians to come up with ideas to present to the government or to the governing body. And I don't know, there are some reasons for that. But I also see you had said something about priorities, national priorities. What are these? And what sectors? How can we have national priorities when we don't have a national vision on certain issues that is publicized and available for us to address and to be able to input as an academic sector? We understand these are your priorities, we can help in this sector, then we can draw in the private support. So who is the ownership, how do we set priorities, all that.
I knew it's going to be more interesting when you open the discussion than when I talk. Definitely. Leadership and priority setting, extremely important. Yes, there is hesitance on the three sides for anybody to take leadership on matters. I can give one example, for example. In the case of the protected area of Tyne, this is an important natural reserves in the country, one of the biggest cedar forests in the country that was dying because of a new disease that we have not identified previously as a scientific community. And the leadership in this instance, or the sparking leadership of this instance, came from the NGOs at that matter. The people in the local community found that their trees are dying while we are sitting in our offices not knowing about the subject. So leadership changes as the subject unfolds. The leadership started with the NGOs at the time. They started flagging and horning and blowing the whistle of the emergency that we have. The minute this became a scientific issue rather than observational issue, the leadership moved to academia. And that's where AUB played an important leadership role in this particular instance, where Dr. Nasri Qawar was the one who was tackling the problem from a pure scientific entomology perspective. Then when we wanted to go for the money, actually not before that, when we wanted to go for spraying the forest based on the recommendations of the scientific team, the leadership left academia, became in the hands of the government, and more particularly in the hands of the Minister of Finance, who said, yes, we have an emergency, we don't have a budget for it, I'm going to extract money from my reserves for this. Then when we wanted to go to the international community, the leadership went from the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Environment to contact the international community and ask them for support and for partnership in tackling this problem of interest to everybody, because this disease can spread on the Mediterranean and kill all cedar forests on the Mediterranean. So leadership went to the public sector. Then when the finances came back from the Global Environment Facility, the leadership came back to AUB with the science being done. So leadership is, once a friend of mine and one of those consuls back in UK taught me that the leadership is designated to the person depending on the problem at hand. Is it a financial problem? Most probably it's going to be government or the international community, because research is not very well funded in Lebanon. Is it a legal problem? It's the government. It's a technical problem or a scientific problem, then it's academia. So, but of course there's a problem in leadership, as you have diagnosed it, my friend. Priorities. Wow. This is a statement from the president of Université Saint-Joseph in the beginning of 2008. And the president of the university is talking about research in academia and science in academia. It's a very interesting statement from the president. And he says, even when you come to set priorities at the research council at the university, if the research council said it's this year environment, physics, all the agriculture engineers will be upset. And if they say it's agriculture and, I don't know, public health, all the fine arts will be upset. He said, we have to converge on one or two topics. If we are very well funded, everybody can do the job. But everybody wants to see their role in the topic of priority. But everybody wants to usually affect the agenda of priorities because it meets his skills and knowledge and know-how. No, it's not wastewater, it's air pollution. No, it's not air pollution, it's about biodiversity. And everybody tries to influence the priority in a non-scientific way based on knowledge and skills and competencies. And this is one of the things that the president is addressing in his statement to the academic family at USG. So we do have priorities. They are a mix between science, economy, and policy and legal issues. Dr. Tariq Mitri, who was the Minister of Environment for 3 months, presented a policy paper to the government. He came back, he says, it was a 10-minute discussion, and they did not come to any conclusion about it. But it was a short government, and no other minister was interested, or no other government has asked its minister to present policy papers. Now that the ex-president is out of office, I'll tell you a little story he told me once. He says, he called the government for a meeting. He said to every minister, can you come back to me in a month's time with a 2-page A4 paper? Tell me, where would you like your ministry to be in 6 months' time? And he says, I did not get anything from anybody. I called back for this, and again, I didn't get anything. Unfortunately, I'm not a head of a primary school. I'm the president of the country. I stopped asking for this. This is word by word from President Lahoud. So the government has to call its team for public policy, and the team has to respond. And at the time, Tariq Mitri, with His Excellency, was the first to respond, but it didn't get far. So priority setting needs to be addressed. And again, the Minister of Agriculture would say agriculture is a priority, and then the Minister of Industry say this is a priority, and Public Health will say this is a priority, and then it gets diluted again, and there's no priorities again. And I think this is a government problem at large, and needs to be heavily addressed. And I think academia has a role to call for this. Lobbying, advocacy, reach out to politicians. When the ministers and the prime ministers are, posted, some proactive visits have to be done, telling them that perhaps this is a good idea and this is a good idea, and interact with the politicians. More interaction, and I think IFI has an important role to play in bringing the politicians with their constituencies and the academia and others.
One of the things we've discovered in the first, essentially this is our first year of doing things, is the comparative advantage we have with our intersectoral technical expertise. There are very few institutions, not just in the Middle East but in the whole world, that can bring to the table 30 to 40 serious researchers, PhDs, experts, experienced people, to look at something like climate change or youth issues, as we're doing, from the perspective of political science, of public health, of engineering, of water, of chemistry, of education, of psychology. I mean, this is an extraordinary comparative advantage that we have this cross-sectoral analytical ability. And you mentioned that in your comments, that academia is best able to generate a multi-sectoral team. How can we take advantage of that capacity, and why can't you do it in government? In theory, you could go to all these other ministries and put together 30 people. In practice, why do you not do it, or why does not you, but why does the government not do this so well? And if we can do it better, how can we best take advantage of it in a manner that would have an impact on policy from where you're sitting?
Again, one of the matters that are extremely important for bringing people around the table. See, in the Constitution, all ministers sit at the table equivalent, except for the Prime Minister. Perhaps that's why he's called the Prime Minister, number one, Minister number one. And it's difficult to bring ministers around the table coordinated by another minister, at the individual level to start with. So the Minister of, say, Public Health cannot call 5 ministers to the table to discuss a matter, in principle, because they all sit equivalently. So why would you be, in this instance, the Prime Minister of the table? And I think this is one of those problems in the Constitution, that nobody brings the different sectors together except the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is a very busy person to do this. So there needs to be a structure to bring them. One of the sort of modalities of bringing them together is in a neutral turf. Nobody is head of the table. Nobody is chairing. And I think academia and public policy institutes have an important role, because they are equidistant from everybody. No hidden agenda, no conflict of interest between X and Y and Z, and no cameras, although there's a camera here. Because, you know, politicians, whenever you have a camera, they're schizophrenic. They have two characters, one on camera and one off camera. So the minute you have the camera and the media, they start talking about different things.
Watch what you say about the media, because I work for them.
No. It's a positive thing that you do, but they get heavily affected by you. And I think bringing the people around a neutral turf is extremely important. For example, when we went to the World Summit on Sustainable Development, you know, sustainable development touches on everything nearly. Who is the most neutral to bring us around the table? It was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's not a sector. It can bring agriculture, environment, public health. So the leadership was given to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs based on the recommendation of the Minister of Environment, because sustainable development is economy, ecology, and sociology. The minute the Minister of Environment chairs, it gets tilted to environment, too much environment, and it doesn't get balanced between the 3 sectors of it.
You focus on basically the matter of the forum, which is climate change, and to hear your opinion, your evaluation of the role of this tripod, specifically on the issue of climate change in Lebanon. Is it working or is it not working in tackling the climate change problem in Lebanon? And if it's not working, why is it not working? And specifically on the policy level, which you mentioned.
I think your question is so trivial. I leave it to my driver to answer. سؤال لك نديم. Nadim has just written a paper on this, and I think he's my driver at this point in time. So you might want to answer, please. It's about climate change and the subject, and your paper is research and policy memo on climate change. تحب تجاوب؟ If my driver would not answer it, I won't be able to answer it. Well, Nadim, تحب تقول شيء؟
No, go ahead.
Well, again, this is one of those subjects dear to the hearts and minds of many people in this room. And I think IFI has taken a very interesting lead in moving science to policy and climate change at the national level and perhaps at the regional level. We have to all be clear and fair with ourselves. This is a novel subject. It's a subject that needs lots of long-term research, that needs long-term funding. You're talking about increase in mosquitoes because of temperatures. You cannot count mosquitoes, so how are you going to count delta mosquitoes? So it is a subject of immense complexity, and it is extremely difficult to have a good notion of it. We're trying. We're at the phase of trying, all of us today, academia, NGOs, private sector, and government, to tackle this problem properly. And I think IFI is brewing the subject, so you get a good brew at the end of it. I think they're doing the right thing to bring people around the table and have a balanced opinion to be able to draw a vision of how to move science to policy and climate change. That's the best I can...
In support. The tripod seems to be working in parts at different levels of government. It is working. Like IFI, as an academic representative with the Ministry of Environment, is working, and then through bringing in private companies, looking at carbon trading and etc. This is raising an awareness of what the government is doing, because they do have an office that supports carbon trading, and then the research that supports this kind of work. So it is very, if you want to call it, at an early stage, let's say, and it's growing. And this is what we're trying to do in this particular forum. We're trying to build on this kernel that we have and make sure that it grows into something that is very productive. Nowhere in the Middle East that I know of, at least, where we're trying that has anybody that's bringing together this kind of a tripod. And this is the essence of what we're doing. We have brought in the government twice already. At the very early stage, and we had visitors from the Jordanian Minister of Environment. And we brought in the private sector, and they worked with us. And we at EUB are trying to generate a momentum in terms of research. And once we start building on that, we will start bringing in other researchers from Lebanon and the area. And this is in the foreseeable future. It's not in the distant future. So it's a step-by-step build-up. Nobody, I think, has launched major works other than developed countries into this kind of, it's a good word, the tripod, where everybody supports everybody else.
Very much so, Nadim. I think one thing I forgot to mention, I would like to, is that once the partnership has matured, it needs to be structured in a fashion that draws the rights and duties and responsibilities of the different partners. We have succeeded in the Tannourine project, and this framework of interaction between the partners was sort of crowned in a decree in the government. So the government has instilled this partnership in a decree which says this is the role of the Ministry of Environment, this is the role of the community and the local committee that is managing the protected area, this is what the role of AUB. After everyone has put it on the paper, it was sort of rubber stamped by the government, which puts a nice framework to it. We can continue discussing things, but if we're not able And this is something that the president of USG has if you're not able to move from discussions and research and ideas to structuring it in a nice administrative clear fashion, we're bound to fail. We have another successful small project that we did that brought private sector, academia, and government, and that is the CELDAS project. And that also brought the international community, which is Équipe Cousteau, who are very active in the domain of environment. And again, if you don't have a final document that says these are the ends of the tripod, or more than a tripod, and these are the rights, duties, and responsibilities of each partner, you're bound to fail as you go. You're bound to stumble. So the foundation of the partnership needs to be written on a nice piece of paper, very clear, and everybody signs that I agree to my duties, rights, and responsibilities, be it technical, financial, legal, or administrative. And I think these two small success stories of bringing these partners together, one was with the University of Balamand on legal issues and legislation of environment, and one was with AUB on research and saving, conserving nature.
Just a comment in the same vein. We're in really very early days of this process, and we've kept a very low profile and basically have not done anything much outside the walls of AUB, but we've been bringing people in from the private sector, the government, NGOs, international community, etc., because this is a rather new process, and we're trying to figure out how can we actually make it useful. Next year, you will see a lot more public activity and, most importantly, new research activity, because we called it the Research and Policy Forum, because everything is anchored between research on the one hand and policy, influencing policy or providing policy options on the other. And we are just at the stage now where we're starting to generate hopefully substantial amounts of money and major partnerships, and we're talking to people like IDRC, the Harvard, the European Union, Muhtasam Fadl in Europe is working on things. I'm in touch with Harvard. I mean, there's major groundwork being laid so that we hope by next year, next fall, and Essam Faris himself has pledged to give us extra injections of funds to get the process moving. But we're going very slowly to make sure that when we start the process, we're actually doing something useful that enhances the work of the professors at AUB and our other colleagues. It's not only AUB. We work with professors and researchers in other places around the region so that we enhance what they're doing, but we also then impact more on the policy-making process and to develop some kind of dynamic. And that's why we gave it the word forum, because it's a place where people can actually meet. Starting this week, we are this hasn't been published yet, but we are starting tomorrow or Monday. We're going to start releasing the Research and Policy Memo. This is the first one on climate change and environment in the region. This is a summary of a lecture by Nadeem Farajallah, who launched our series. Every public activity we do, including this one, will have a policy memo, which is just a two-page, nicely designed, easy to read, because we were told that policymakers can't read for more than 10 minutes. Is that right?
Oof, exaggerated.
That's a long document.
10 seconds.
So, yeah, I was in Washington. Everybody I talked to in Washington, friends of mine in NGOs and in government, I kept asking them, I say, what can we do that's most useful? They say, give me something to read. Give policymakers, officials, something to read that they can read on the car from their office to the airport in Washington, which is a 15-minute ride.
Or on the plane to Doha.
Or on the, yeah, well, that's a long trip, but 15 minutes. Basically, if a policymaker gives you 15 minutes to read something, then you're doing pretty well. So this is the beginning of our process of taking our research work and spreading it out more widely. This will go in Arabic and English to mailing lists that we are compiling of ministers, government officials, members of parliament all over the Arab world, NGOs, international agencies, UN agencies, other researchers in academia and think tanks and private sector, all the people who should know about this work. So as this starts, literally this week, we will start getting the impact of our forum more widely known. But we see this as this is the foundational year. Next year, we will do a lot more substantive work, including funding new research. or funding research that professors are doing and giving them some extra support, and then bringing them together with policymakers and others. So we're very excited about what we're going to start doing next year, and we think this has been a very useful first year to start thinking about how we do this, mainly by interacting and talking with people in these different sectors.
Actually, thanks, Berj, again for answering this trivial question.
We can't hear you.
Thanks for answering this trivial question. First of all, I have no doubt that academia has done a great job. It has been efforts and the achievements have been increasing since 10 years, since 1999, when Lebanon first, I think in 99 or 2000, the work on climate change started.
A bit earlier.
Of course, since then we didn't see at the government level a policy change, a real policy change. And of course, academia has done some work, and it's not new to AUB or other universities to work on this. Basically, to reach a result, we need to lift the barriers. And it's good here if you could tell us more, what were the main barriers? Why wasn't the ministry, your ministry specifically, because it is not an implementing ministry, you don't have implementation authorities, and as everyone knows, but you are more into the legal part where you organize the sector and you oversee it. Why hasn't the ministry been able to reach a point of change?
One thing that obviously we have as a Ministry of Environment, one time a good professor of mine told me, you don't say failed, you say not succeeded. Not succeeded in putting a policy, and I don't think this is inherent to the environmental sector. We don't have policies in the country. We don't have a transport policy, we don't have an agricultural policy, and the obstacles of putting an environmental policy are obstacles like any other sector. Conflict of interest, no understanding of the value of policy making. Actually, the Arabic language has not developed to a stage where it actually differentiates between policy and politics. سياسي وسياسي. سياسات وسياستي كمان. سياسة الحكومة. سياسات هي جمع. And I think this is, if you talk anthropology, language is a reflection of maturity of the community. So the whole concept of policy making, if you talk even to CDR, there are two major departments at CDR: planning and programming, and actual operations. Everybody wants to be in operations because everybody wants to operate. Those who want to do the intellectual work, which is mainly in the side of policy, are usually of a lesser kind, Class B servants. So the whole concept of policy making in the country needs attention from all of us, and the environmental sector being one of them. But I would like here to read a quick extract on the interlinkages and how could academia perhaps spark this. It's in Arabic. The president of SG says, وعلينا أن نتعرف بأنه ليس من السهل أن نضع موضع التنفيذ مشروعا بحثيا وأن نقيمه وأن نحدد موقعه بين مشاريع أخرى للبحث في جامعتنا وخارجها. وليس من السهل أيضا الحصول على التمويل المطلوب ولحظ الاستثمارات الممكنة لنتائج الأبحاث العلمية والاهتداء إلى الأطراف التي سيقام معها التعاون ضروري to find the right partners. وباختصار فإنه ليس من السهل على الباحث on the researcher أن ينجح في إدراج اسمه في قائمة الباحثين المعترف بهم. فهذه الترقية باتت اليوم تتطلب فضلا عن الاختصاص المحدد مهارات إدارية غير معهودة. Researchers have to start learning how to manage research rather than just produce it. And that is something that the President is asking for, and I think it is the same for all the other sectors. Government needs to start understanding the importance of leveraging research for sake of policy making. private sector has to understand the importance of investing in research to leverage better quality products and better services. And these concepts are not yet well mature in either of the tripods.
Here and then over there.
Thank you for the interesting lecture. I have a small anecdote about drivers because when I started in the project 9 months ago, I was recruited as a leader, and we recruited a driver, and we had a fancy 4-wheel drive, and he was, at home waiting to start the field visits. And one thing I learned in my professional career is to take the time in inception phase of a project, so I took all the time I want, and 6 months later, my driver comes to me saying Madame Mansour, you go from one meeting to another, and you're late for the meeting, and then you come late from the meeting, but when are you really going to start this project? So, I'm still looking forward to starting, but it's a perception of prioritizing, and it's interesting to see that there is someone from the public sector who is daring to talk about the constraints for linking between private sector, public sector, and academia. But since we have the advantage of pushing the public sector side of it, I wanted to follow up on what Tyne was saying in terms of policy making, because this is a little bit what would prioritize interventions of people. It is what the private sector would focus on if we give them priorities, what the academics would focus on if we tell them this is a priority. But then we need a framework for prioritizing things, and we keep inventing and reinventing policies, and they never get finalized or endorsed, and then it becomes a part of each political agenda. So you have one minister who starts a policy. I mean, we can talk about solid waste, quarries, all these success stories in Lebanon. Each minister comes and he sets a new policy, and then the new minister comes and he wants to have his new policy, and we go on and on for every single policy we know of. And if we take this trend from the large policy framework to the smaller standards and procedures, so we keep on evolving, but we don't seem to agree on one, adopt one, and say, okay, this is the one we want to adopt and enforce. This is one issue I would like you to give your view about whether you think there is a way of changing this trend and having a more stable policy framework that we can rely on and refer to. And the second one, the last on the aspects of policy making and implementation, is evaluation and credibility and measuring success or failure. I mean, will the public sector, in your view, be able to accept a way of really measuring how we are implementing a policy, or how we're implementing a specific aspect, and tell the public, the general public, that we have been able to achieve so and so with very small or large successes, but in a very measurable way, and not in the political and
in front of the cameras
way as we have so far. It's an opportunity for us to have your neutral view of it.
Do you want to answer or comment, or
maybe we can hear.
Okay,
I'll try to
and then over. Go ahead.
Try.
Thank you. Thank you. Talking how important is communication or interaction, or how these three, the tripod, how they complement each other. I believe the major tool is networking or interaction between these three triples, and interaction or networking within each one of these triples, like at the government level, or at the public sector, or at the private sector, or at the university or academic. How, from your experience, Berj, and things regarding related to environment, how do you evaluate this networking?
Again, two very broad concepts: putting policy and evaluating and monitoring whether your policy is actually introducing change. And changing hands in politics, and then policy changing as hands change in politics. Well, that's the fact of politics. But again, going back to this book of Built to Last, in this book, the researchers looked at excellent companies and very good companies. They did not look at excellent companies and bad companies, and they found the differences. So the p-value will be very big, and the epidemiologists and the statisticians are happy. They looked at a very small difference, the very excellent and the sort of just behind. And they looked at what are the major, one of the major differences between the two is that the CEO of the company that is excellent, his average or her average age is about 17 years. So some of them stay for 30, some of them for 25, but the average age of a CEO like Boeing, like IBM, like Procter & Gamble, compared to the ones that sort of are just behind, the average age of the CEO of the companies that are just behind is about 12. And they said that the presence of the CEO for a long period of time is extremely important for stability and policy making. Unfortunately, and I'm not saying this because I am a Director General, unfortunately stability in the administration is usually represented by the Director General. And interestingly, we once went with a Minister of Environment to Syria. And the Minister of Environment in Lebanon was telling the Minister of Environment in Syria. He said, you know, senior administrators, I was sitting beside the minister here, so senior administrators are there to stay. So I try to invest in them and give them all the tools and try to skill them to do their job. Because we come and go, and the administrators stay. So the minister in Syria said, yeah, that's very true. I have been here for 17 years. I've changed 4 director generals. So, in fact, the continuity of the senior administrator is extremely important for policy stability. This is, in Lebanon, this is neither available at the policy level, at the political level. The ministers change. We have, since 1943 up to now, about 66 governments. The government's average age in the country is less than 1 year. How can you do policy and measure whether this policy is being implemented and introducing the change with the indicators at hand? Again, I remember trying to develop a partnership with the Ministry of Agriculture. In a span of 5 years, we had 4 director generals at the Ministry of Agriculture. And the importance of the lead person, and I can take AUB as an example, is extremely important. The presence of a committed chief team leader at any institute, at anybody, is extremely important. If these people change on a regular basis, you would find that those institutes or those bodies move in different directions every time a new leader comes in place. So the stability of the leader in one body is extremely important. I can give one example, and this is my pure subjective opinion, of the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance was headed by Prime Minister Sanyura for a long period of time. No, it's not him. He has nothing to do. He's only responsible for the ministry. And when he was not there, the ministers at hand were as good as he was. Mr. Qurum is a competent right man in the right place. Mr. Qattar is the right man in the right place. And Mr. Saba is the right man in the right place. And they were able to continue with the general trend in policy making at the Ministry of Finance. And the Ministry of Finance has really made a major leap in the country because of the stability of the leadership. You don't have this at other ministries. And I think this is a solid example, again, in my modest subjective opinion, of the importance of the leader in introducing continuous change. And I think this is everywhere. That's why the permanent secretaries in places like UK are extremely important, because they sustain the momentum. Of course, there might be redirections, there might be new ideas to kickstart in the administration, but they have a very important role to maintain it. Networking, it's costly to network. It's a very easy word to say, but it is very costly to do it. But I go back to the public seminar of Ahmed Zawil, who got an honorary Ph.D. from AUB. He was giving at the West Hall. He spoke about reading. He says one of the Prime Minister of Israel said that we will start fearing the Arabs when they start reading. And he said that the Arab world is regressed and will not progress because of 4 reasons. He mentioned them. One of them is that we don't read. And networking need people to read. Networking is not only sitting in the room and discussing. You upload information on the internet. Nobody wants to read it. Nobody wants to know about it. There's no networking taking place. We don't go for the information. We would like to sit usually. This is our... Students do it. I did it. Everybody does it. I did not find any information about the subject, sir. Where did you search for it? I searched for it, in my father's cupboard. This is how far we go in trying to research for information to be able to network. Networking is extremely important, but it is extremely expensive and needs skill, and it needs a two-way thing. You need to give and take in networking. And this is something that is not part of our daily doings. We don't actually outreach to the information. We would like the information to come to us at the door. This is not what happens in more developed countries. I remember when I was in UK, we had 9 hours of teaching and 9 hours of self-study. This is not part of our way of doing things in these parts of the world. They teach you how to reach out to network rather than just sit and wait for the flow. To be proactive in networking. And I'm sure many people in this room have examples to give on this. I've sent you the letter the first time, second time, third time. I told you everything in it, but I did not receive it, but I did not notice it.
It seems that the common concern here is actually how effective and flexible is the government in terms of addressing the concerns of the other 2 components of the tripod. And perhaps this should be the vision in itself, perhaps in terms of reforming the government and changing the processes in it to be able to accommodate and be flexible enough to respond in a timely manner to the concern of the private and academia.
The concept of public servancy is not there. I'm a public authority. I'm not a public servant. I'm a public authority. That's the problem. When they are posted in their senior administrative positions or political positions, they forget that this is a public servancy position, not a public authority position. The patriarch of the Armenian community, Karakin Tyne, was being interviewed, and the interviewer said to him, where does the church extract its authority from? From Jesus and Mary, or from the Holy Spirit, or from God? He says, authority can only be claimed by the quality of the service you provide to the community. We forget this. We think just because I have the title, I'm an authority. You're not an authority. You are a servant who can only claim authority based on the quality of the service you provide to the community. We don't have this at our heart. And this is why we're not concerned about the concerns of the community.
It's really a problem of people.
It's a problem. It's problem of people, and people put processes. So if the frame of mind is not right, the process is not right. You're there to put a process to serve. You're not there to put a process to become an authority.
I was wondering precisely whether people is yet because and specifically the representatives of the people, because we're thinking about research agendas, and it's like that we're thinking that it's academia and that should push the research agenda of with its research agenda, it should push the political agenda of the government, and it brings us back to the leadership thing and the vision. But I think the people and is an issue by itself, that aspect, and because how far are we from having a green or environmental parliamentary coalition? I would answer that myself. Very far. It's more like a sectarian at this stage. It's just a sectarian parliamentary coalition that we have. But how would that help, in your opinion? How can that be effective?
We'll take one more question behind there, and we'll stop.
I have a very specific question.
Your questions are always difficult. Please don't make them that difficult at the end of the day.
I recently went back to my home village in Kura, and I used some 40 years ago, even more, to drawing the place, and I could go to all sorts of places. I found that I cannot, for one good reason and not another bad reason. The good reason was that few mashahir are still around. The goats are not eating. And there are really forests of oak trees, and then Chajat. But I spoiled my fun when I got up to hill and tried to go to places I used to go, that I cannot go there. Now, it occurred to me there is a fire. And no way you can get to these places. Now, my question specifically, and we knew what happened quite recently, who has done anything to make us more prepared to protect the few green spots we have? Do we have to get helicopters from Cyprus, from Italy? This is a matter. The money is around. It's inexcusable. Is it? Of course, the public is not putting enough pressure. The government isn't there now. I hope they begin attending to this thing. But there are things that could be done in the meantime by the regular bureaucrats. مع البلدية, مع الوزارة, has anything been done in this area so that come next dry season, with a windy day, with a fire, no matter how it starts, how can we put off this fire? Not a difficult question.
It's a thesis on its own. Anybody of the master's postgraduate are ready to take it as a dissertation. We've had lots of fires last season, and it was catastrophic. Greece had the same thing. Greece went through the same catastrophe. The government resigned in Greece.
Is that a policy recommendation?
Huh? Sorry? Problem was solved. In California, they had the same problem. And they have Arnold Schwarzenegger behind the government there.
What about us?
No. Stopping fires is like stopping death. It's a natural process that will happen no matter what we do. What our role is to reduce the intensity of those fires, the frequency of those fires, and so on and so forth. And there are 3 stages in this. There's the prevention stage, there's the combating stage, and the rehabilitation stage. The government is very attentive to this important issue. The Prime Minister himself has headed multiple meetings and given very strict instructions to everybody to tackle this problem. Money has been injected into this particular problem. One of the problems, as I was saying, that will is difficult to bypass. And I said, if one of those pillars fail, the system might fail. I'll just give an example. I'll say what we're trying to do about it. Most of the land that was burned is private land. In private land, government cannot enter without the permit of the owner. If you want to tree plant it again, you cannot tree plant it unless you get the approval of the owner. The owner wants it burned because he wants to build on it and make more value out of the plot. Some people burn the forest on purpose so they can actually change its exploitation rates to build more on it. And that is one of our legal problems. But we need helicopters. We looked at the Puma helicopters that we have bought in the 1980s that did not fly for 21 hours of flight, but they have rusted. Fixing those will cost us about 16 million euros. 16 million euros. We started with the municipalities, as you have advised just now. 32 municipalities were burnt, faced forest fires last season. We called for a meeting to see what is their experience, what are the recommendations, and so on. The effort we did to bring them to a meeting, out of the 32, only 16 showed up. Out of the 16, all of them confirmed that it is lack of money. One of the municipalities said, I always clean the roads on each side of the road. So when somebody throws a cigarette, it did not, expand into the forest. This year, I didn't have a budget. I was not able to clean the sides of the roads because I didn't have the budget for it, which is about 12 million Lebanese lira. And my forest burned. Conservation without finance is only conversation. Nobody is willing to put money on environment up to this hour. Neither the private sector nor the government. Perhaps academia is doing better on those things. We need to put money for prevention and combating, and we tried to mobilize the money. We have mobilized up to $5 million up to this hour, and we're trying to put a plan and try to implement the plan. The plan has many players: the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Interior, the non-governmental organizations, the municipalities, and to a lesser extent, the Ministry of Environment. To a much lesser extent, the Ministry of Environment. We are the least concerned about this project. We have been given the leadership. Going back to Dr. Farajalla's, nobody was willing to take the leadership out of the stakeholders that are most mandated to do something about it. And Prime Minister Sanyura said, for change you either need somebody who is weird or stupid to take the lead on those issues. And it says, Ministry of Environment, why don't you take the lead? Yes, Mr. Prime Minister. We'll take the lead, but we are not the most competent and the most knowledgeable and the most skilled and the most resourced of all those who are sitting at the table. He says, Mr. Prime Minister, I have this helicopter. This is what we need. And he is somebody who has 30 years of experience in one of the most mandated ministries responsible for this problem. The country was burning, and he brought a photo of a helicopter off his wall with a frame. Not a single piece of documentation. Leadership. Absent.
Last comment, because we need to stop, from the Minister of Environment and the Youth Shadow Cabinet in Lebanon.
Yes, thank you. I have two small questions. Last week there was a World Economic Forum concerning the Middle East section, and they put a lot of emphasis on climate change subjects. How can we, being the smallest country in the region and having no heavy industry, how can we be players in this subject? Even if all the country becomes green, we will have no effect, and we will keep having the bad effects on us, coming on us. Plus, the second question concerning forest fires. I have heard a rumor, I would like to know your opinion about, that there have been a person or a society, I don't know, who was ready to provide Lebanon with 2 airplanes for firefighting, but there has been a veto from superpowers because we will have Air Force that we do not have now, and I mean night vision and infrared. How can we work towards solving this problem? The only solution is having Air Force for firefighting when we have other regional forces that are putting heat on us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for these questions. This is a typical minister that functions on rumors.
That's why he asked.
That's why I asked. It's his role. That rumor is not true at all. The government was open to all propositions of any kind. Planes, helicopters, so on and so forth. Nobody came forward to provide us with anything. The Prime Minister spoke with the Prime Minister of France, asking him to see if it's possible to fix our Puma helicopters at the expense of the French government. The French government sent a military team to look at those helicopters, and they gave a report that these helicopters will cost us 16 million euros, plus or minus, don't quote me on the exact number, but in the millions of euros to fix them. And this option was dropped down. Another option was that France has lots of Puma helicopters that are extremely important, and these helicopters are no more up to the European standard of these type of machines, and they want to give them out to the less developing world. They're functional, they're okay, they do the job, but they're no more, for example, noise level or CO2 emissions are no more according to Euro standards, and they want to give them away, and we are in discussion with the French government on this. So the rumor is not, to my knowledge, very precise. كلامك مو دقيق. مع الوزير. The other question was the World Economic Forum. Yes, we are not the biggest polluter. Yes, we are not impacting climate change as much as the OECD countries or the like. But we are going to capture the side impacts of climate change. And if we want to address climate change, we can concentrate very much on adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation and not mitigation. Mitigation is more towards the source. Adaptation measures, and I leave it perhaps to the climate change experts in the room to talk more about climate change.
Thank you, Berj. We're going to bring it to a close. We try to keep our meetings to an hour and a half maximum at the end of the day, but I want to thank Sareen Karajerjian, where's Sareen, for doing all the work and preparing for this. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Berj, and Nadim, thank you again for your good leadership in our climate change forum. We will continue to have more of these meetings. Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking Berj once more.